So you have a lot of content, obviously, around Cambridge University. A lot of your time has not only been spent studying, attending, but also making videos about your experience. And again, it's one of those things where it has nothing to do with me, but they're super fascinating. And one of your videos that did really well was saying, you ranked first at Cambridge University. Here are things that I did in order to study, do better on these essays, XYZ. And I know you already have a great video about this, but I think it'd be interesting to dive in a little bit on this podcast about something you talked about, the essay memorization framework. And first of all, how do you learn about these certain frameworks that helped you study? Was it through podcasts, other YouTube? Like, is it in some book in the library that you just stumbled upon? Because like a lot of things in your YouTube channel, I'm like, I've never even heard it. Like, this would have been helpful.
Yeah. No, so the first time I heard about all this kind of effective studying stuff was in some random psychology lecture that we had in my second year of med school. And like every single person in the year walked away from that thinking, wow, why the hell haven't we heard this stuff before? Because it was all stuff about, how does memory work and how do you actually retain stuff? And like all of medical school is just about memorizing an absolute torrent of information. So I walked away from that thinking, oh my God, my life has been changed by this lecture. And then I found out that there's actually this whole world of research where people have actually studied this topic and it's just not very well known. Like no one gets taught how to study or how to learn, and the fact that you shouldn't take notes. Because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was like, what the heck? Why have I never heard of this? So break it down for us a little bit.
Okay.
And why did you, just you saying why you shouldn't take notes. Excuse me? Explain.
Right. So essentially there's a handful of techniques that work and a handful of techniques that are popular, but that the evidence shows don't really work as well. The things that don't really work are rereading your textbook or rereading your notes, highlighting your notes, and summarizing your books, i.e. taking notes. And that's like such a common thing that we do as students. We think, okay, I'm going to take notes from the textbook, I'm going to summarize it in my own words, and then I'll highlight the bits that are important, and then I'll reread them over and over again in order to prepare for my exam. And that's just a default thing that I also used to do when I was in high school. But actually, if you look at all the evidence all the research that's been done about this, those techniques are fairly towards the bottom of the pack of effective studying techniques. The things that do make a difference is something called active recall, which basically just means testing yourself on something repeatedly. And the idea is that as you try and work hard to retrieve information from your brain, the act of that effort strengthens the connection with that information. So that's like the fundamental component of effective studying, that you actually have to do the practice to get the thing out of your brain. But it's sort of like, practicing any musical instrument, like playing the guitar, you actually have to do the practice, and it's really hard initially until it becomes second nature. Whereas for studying, we think that it shouldn't be hard. We think that it should be easy. And if it takes us a lot of brain power, we think we must be stupid and we're not doing it right. But actually it's supposed to be hard, and that's exactly how you learn. So that was like the main insight that I gained from all this stuff that I kind of preach about all the time on the channel.
So how do you practice that? Do you, instead of, rereading the notes or whatever, do you make up questions from your notes and then do the note card thing, and that's how you test yourself? How did you find yourself doing that act of trying to recall that information?
Yeah, so I've had loads of methods for this over the years. I think flashcards, there's apps these days like Anki and Quizlet, which are really good for kind of specific tiny bits of information, like when was the Battle of Hastings? Oh, 1066. That's one small discrete fact. A flashcard is really good for that. But I find just kind of generally writing questions for myself to be like the best way. So a friend of mine, I made a video about this, a friend of mine literally didn't make any notes at all throughout the whole year. He just wrote a list of 500 questions for himself. And his way of studying was just going through the questions and flagging up the stuff he didn't know the answer to and then looking it up. And he ended up ranking like second in the entire year, of these like super competitive students just by asking himself questions. So I think that worked really well as well. And then the final one that I always tell people is the Feynman technique. Have you ever heard about this?
No.
So there was this physicist called Richard Feynman who was famous for being like a amazing educator, teacher, etc.
I know who Richard Feynman is, but I don't know Feynman.
No, quite.
Don't judge me too hard, guys.
But yeah, the Feynman technique basically is, could you explain this thing to a 5-year-old? And if you can't, then it means you don't understand it enough. And then you sort of figure out, you would keep asking why, because a 5-year-old would keep asking why. And if you keep asking why, you eventually get to the simple truth of how it works. And when you can explain it simply to someone, that means you really understand it. And that's another thing that I preach about a lot on the channel.
That's so good. That's why I think YouTube is so special, because how I got my start with showing behind the scenes of creative work was right after I learned and put it into practice. I would literally meet up with a friend. Listen, can you explain this shutter, ISO, and aperture to me one more time? Just one more time. And it wasn't after maybe a week or 2 weeks that I really started my filming adventure, that I was teaching people on the internet, and there would be comments like, oh, this is so much more simple than other people have explained it. Because sometimes when you're in it and you've been in it and it's become second nature, it is hard to explain it to someone like they're 5 years old, right? Because you're so in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And I think like that's one of the pieces of advice that I always give people who could come ask about, how do I start a channel? Is that, I think a lot of people have this view that they're not experts in a topic, therefore they're not qualified to teach the thing. Whereas what I tell them is like, no. The very fact that you're a beginner makes you more qualified to teach shutter speed, ISO, aperture to these people than compared to someone who's been doing it for 20 years, because they don't appreciate what the beginner's mind is like. I think that's a positive
100%.
rather than a negative.